diphtheria, dysentery. That's just a sampling of what I could face on an upcoming 4-month solo trip around the world. According to the experts, I wasn't supposed to drink the water, eat the food, or kiss the women. Swimming in fresh water, walking around barefoot, definitely out. But there was one thing I feared more than any ghastly disease, and I'll get to that a little later. So this trip took place in 2007. I've been working as an editor for PC World magazine. I was there for 15 years. I don't mean to brag, but I was an executive editor. Until I got laid off. Soon after, my girlfriend gave me the old. So I moped around my apartment for a couple of days. I moped around the local coffee shop for a couple of days. I moped around the gym for a couple of days. And finally, I started moping around the local bookstore. And I found myself in the travel section. And I started thumbing through all the Lonely Planets and the Rough Guides. You know, these gorgeous travel guide books with the sumptuous text and the delicious photos and the descriptions of the places you'll go and the things you'll do and the people you'll meet. And pretty soon I could almost smell the coconut suntan lotion. I could almost hear the bellowing of howler monkeys and the screeching of macaws. But there was one thing that concerned me. Every one of these guidebooks had a graphic, detailed passage on sexually transmitted diseases. So my first reaction was, whoa. Then I thought to myself, you know, I bet these world travelers are a friendly bunch. So using the books, I went ahead and booked a 4-month solo trip around the world. I started in Boston, where I live. Went to Venezuela, Greece, South Africa, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Australia, New Zealand, back to Boston. 4 months of solo travel. Now, most people, when they return from an exotic trip, they rave about the food and the culture and the friendly local people. I'm not going to say that they're lying. I'm just going to say my experience was a little different. You could say there was some teachable moments. You could say it was an experience more than a vacation. Actually, I'm not going to lie. I had a rotten, miserable time for large portions of the trip. And I take some responsibility for that. Before this trip, I was not an experienced traveler. I'd been to Mexico, I'd been to Europe, I'd been to Canada. Those are 1 or 2 week vacations. This was 4 months of solo travel. Another thing, I'm not the hardiest person in the world. I'm not wild about loud noises, weird smells, or being crammed together with people who sweat. Public toilet seats, you know, some people put down 1 layer of toilet paper. I put down 3. Another issue, I spent a little too much time on the internet. So after I'd already booked all the flights and made all the arrangements, I couldn't stay off my computer. And guess what I found? So this is a slide from the U.S. Center for Disease Control's website, and it's a map of the diarrhea hotspots around the world. The hotspots are red, and the trajectory of my trip is in black, and as you can see, I was going to be hitting all of the hotspots. But there was something that concerned me even more. Guinea worm disease. Anyone familiar with this? So I mentioned earlier that certain countries, the experts don't want you walking around in barefoot or drinking the local water. And what they're concerned about are parasites like guinea worm. And apparently the way this works, you ingest some infected water, the parasite gets into your body, and over the course of time, it grows into a 3-foot worm. And apparently you can feel this thing crawling around under your skin. And then when it's ready to reproduce, it pops its head out of a blister in your foot. I know this slide kind of upset some people. Shut it off. You know, last thing I want to do is upset anyone or trigger anyone. Cause an international incident. Whoa. And that's when I realized it was probably time to consult an expert. 6 weeks before my departure, I found myself in the waiting room of a Boston travel vaccine clinic. A nurse wearing a black hoodie under a lab coat hustles me into her office. Her computer has a bumper sticker. I stop for entrails. So she asks, where are we heading? Let's see, I'm going to Venezuela, Greece, South Africa, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Australia, New Zealand. Wow, wish I got that much vacation. Actually, I just lost my job. Aw, bummer. She taps her keyboard and then looks directly at me. You're gonna need 7 shots, 3 more visits, and we'll need some blood. A newbie, eh? You You'll be fine. She hands me pamphlets on malaria and something called chikungunya fever. Then she starts doling out the prescriptions. If you get the runs, in Vietnam, take ciprofloxacin. In Thailand, take azithromycin. In Cambodia, I want you to take Pepto-Bismol daily. It can turn your tongue black, but some women might like that look. By the time she finishes with me, I'm afraid to leave my apartment, never mind the country. But there's no turning back. I've already spent $6,000 on plane tickets. I better come back with something that doesn't require antibiotics. A job, a woman, or at least some material for my Match.com profile. On August 28th, 2007, I depart for Venezuela with one piece of luggage, my new $200 backpack, crammed with overpriced travel clothes, medications, water purifying tablets, earplugs, nose plugs, dust masks, safety pins, bobby pins, scotch tape, duct tape, service oil, Allen wrenches, and other stuff recommended by the guidebooks. As the flight attendant discusses water landings, sweat collects beneath the money belt strapped under my pants. I glance at my seatmates, two older women sucking on hard candies. They don't seem worried. And last year I went to France and came back in one piece. Okay, Venezuela's a little more dangerous than France. Okay, it's a lot more dangerous than France. Okay, it has one of the highest murder rates in the world. And a driver is picking me up at the Caracas airport just to drive me 100 yards from the international terminal to the domestic terminal because it's not safe to walk around outside unescorted. But if some hoodlum draws a weapon, I'll just fork over the decoy travel wallet around my neck, containing $20 and an expired Macy's charge card. These guidebooks know all the tricks. A hidden secret security pocket in the shirt contains photocopies of my passport, credit cards, and the U.S. consulate phone numbers for the 7 countries I'm visiting. My money belt, the big one, strapped under my pants, contains my water plane tickets, $500 in cash, and a list of Western-trained doctors on each continent. I've emailed myself scanned images of my passport, plane tickets, and immunization card. I've taken every precaution recommended by the guidebooks. The rest is up to fate. Here's where I was heading. Venezuela was the base of the Caribbean. And what I was doing is I was flying into Caracas and changing there for a domestic flight to Margarita Island. Now, Margarita Island used to be the Venezuelan equivalent of St. Martha's Vineyard. It was a nice vacation area. It was also a world-famous windsurfing destination. So before this trip, I was a beginner, intermediate windsurfer, and I wanted to hit some of these famous windsurfing spots. So I made arrangements with an outfitter on Margarita Island. And a month before I'm about to leave, I get a manila envelope in the mail this thick. And most of what's in that envelope are instructions on what to do once I get to the airport. So I get to the airport. I find the guy with the sign with my name on it. He grabs my hand. He takes me out to the curb. We jump into a huge black SUV. We drive 100 yards from the international terminal to the domestic terminal. He grabs my hand. He takes me inside. He buys my plane ticket. He points to a chair and says, "You sit there until your flight is called. You do not get a drink of water. You do not go to the bathroom. And heaven forbid you do not walk around outside." Oh, I got it. Venezuela was a dangerous place. But in addition to my fears of crime, another issue I had with this trip was this whole notion of budget travel. So these guidebooks make it sound glamorous and adventurous. They even refer to it as backpacking. You're not going on some prepackaged trip, pal. You're lighting out on your own. One of the issues I had with the backpacking was the backpack. So I was traveling for 4 months. If it didn't fit in the backpack, it didn't go on the trip. So I wore the same clothes for 4 months. I did wash them, but by the time I got home, I had ended up having to burn most of them. Another issue I had with the budget travel were the accommodations. So the guidebooks recommend I couldn't stay in a Hyatt Regency every night, so the guidebooks recommend staying in youth hostels. Now, who stays in youth hostels? Youths! So when I took this trip, I was 48 years old. Most people take these trips, they're in their late teens and early 20s. So here's a photo of me out for dinner with my hostel mates in New Zealand, and you can see they're all like, "Yeah, this is great." And I'm in the corner, "Just get me the hell out of here." Still, there was one thing I feared more than a youth hostel filled with youths, and I'll get to that a little later. Another issue I had with the budget travel was the actual travel. So I was not flying first class. I was not flying business class. I was barely flying coach. And what that meant was I had a lot of red-eye flights, and a lot of red-eye flights with multiple stopovers. Now the guidebooks recommend when you have a stopover, it should be at least 5 hours. So that way if your flight coming in is delayed, or you have trouble getting through customs, you've got a nice buffer. Because if you miss one of these flights, it's kind of a cascading effect, and you don't want to be stuck anywhere. So here's a sample of some of the red-eyes that I took. Actually, I took 3 in 1 month. So Venezuela to Greece, standard flight to Europe, a little jet lag. Greece to South Africa, that was 10 hours overnight, but the nice thing, it was in the same time zone. But the worst, the absolute worst flight was from Cape Town, South Africa to Bangkok. So the flight went something like this. I left Cape Town at 7 a.m. I arrived in Bangkok at 4 p.m. the next day. So I flew from Cape Town to Johannesburg, 5-hour stopover. Johannesburg to Hong Kong, 5-hour stopover. Hong Kong to Bangkok. And actually, here's a selfie of me getting off the plane in Bangkok. Another issue I had with the trip, again, I take responsibility for this, was my expectations were a little out of line. And one area where they were out of line was this whole windsurfing business. So, I was a beginner intermediate windsurfer, so if the wind's 15, 20 miles an hour, perfect, no problem. So here's a photo of people windsurfing off of Margarita Island in Venezuela. I had a great time there, didn't get murdered even once. But the next place I was going to go windsurfing was Greece. And my destination in Greece was a world-famous windsurfing spot called Karpathos. It's an island way down here. It's a Greek island, but it's off the coast of Turkey. So I flew into Athens. I took an 18-hour overnight ferry from Athens to Karpathos. So I get to Karpathos, again, I'm a beginner intermediate windsurfer, 15, 20 miles an hour, no problem. So I get to Karpathos. The winds are 40, 45 miles an hour. I can't stand the windsurfer. They remove me from the adult beach and bring me down to the kiddie beach. The winds are still 35, 40 miles an hour. I can't stand the windsurfer. I spend most of my time in Karpathos either in the water or in bed with the cold. Not what I was expecting. The next place I was going to go windsurfing was South Africa. So in South Africa, I was doing something called the garden route, where you go up the eastern coast and you stay in all these little towns. So I'm in Cape Town. I'm thumbing through the travel literature, trying to figure out, okay, where am I going to go windsurfing? And I noticed that there was another activity they were offering in the same waters as windsurfing. And that activity was shark cage diving. So the way the shark cage diving worked, you paid an outfitter an outrageous amount of money. They take you out on the water, they put you in a steel cage, they drop you over the side, and you can pet the great white sharks. So I thought to myself, okay, windsurfing, great white sharks. Windsurfing, great white sharks. Windsurfing, great white sharks. Windsurfing, great white sharks. No, thank you. Still, there was one thing I feared more than being eaten alive by a great white shark, and I'll get to that a little later. Another area where my expectations were out of line was when it came to sightseeing. So I was going to Cambodia, and one of the things you want to see in Cambodia is Angkor Wat. Now, Angkor Wat's the largest religious structure in the world. And if you're going to go to Angkor Wat, you stay in a little town next door called Siem Reap. So I get to Siem Reap. I buy a 3-day pass to Angkor Wat. I take a tuk-tuk out to Angkor Wat. I'm walking around the grounds for 3 hours, and I become what is known as templed out. I am done with Angkor Wat. I cannot look at another pile of moss-covered rubble. And this is when I realized, maybe I'm just not a sightseer. When I was in Greece, I saw the ruins, and I thought to myself, That looks like an unfinished parking garage. So I'm stuck in Siem Reap for 3 more nights. I start thumbing through the travel literature. What else is there to do in Siem Reap? Well, they have a crocodile farm in the center of town. 16, 18-foot reptiles, maybe a zoo kind of thing. So I go down to the crocodile farm. I'm standing outside, trying to figure out, do I want to spend the $5 to go in there? And I noticed that right next to the crocodile farm, there was a swimming hole filled with children. Crocodile farm, swimming hole filled with children. No, thank you. Another activity that was recommended in Cambodia was something called Thunder Ranch. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the history of Cambodia. 70s, 80s, 90s, horrific. Genocide under Pol Pot, civil war, invasion by the Vietnamese, more civil war. They didn't have a stable government until the late 1990s. So all these years of constant war, what it meant was you had large numbers of the population running around with military-grade weapons. So I'm imagining some entrepreneurs got together and thought, okay, we got tourists coming in, we got military-grade weapons, let's start a shooting range. And they called it Thunder Ranch. And my understanding of how this worked, you go to Thunder Ranch, and they give you a menu. And the menu has 3 columns. Column 1, drinks. Column 2, military-grade weapons. And column 3, livestock. So you can get a martini, and a rocket launcher, and blow a hole in a cow. Or maybe you're more of a white wine person, you get a nice sauterne and a machine gun and shoot up a bunch of chickens. No, thank you. Then there were some issues with the trip that were not my fault. These were omissions and inaccuracies in the guidebooks and the travel literature. And one of the biggest, well, let's call this an omission, took place in Melbourne, Australia. After dropping my bags at Melbourne's Woolaroo Inn, a Best Western knockoff near the center of town, I ambled down Swanston Street to the waterfront, the Yarra River, taking in the Aussie scene. A fly lands on my lip. I swat it away. Crossing Bourke Street, I spot the stone facade and copper dome of Melbourne's historic Flinders Street train station. Another fly and another swat. A woman in a suit exits the train station and waves. A girl on a skateboard waves. A guy on a cell phone waves. Do I know these people? Something tunnels in my nose. Something skitters in my underwear. I look down, and flies are collecting on me as if I were a rotting carcass. I join everyone around me, cursing, waving, and swatting. I flee down Flinders Street and duck into the Melbourne Aquarium. Feeding time begins in 15 minutes. Then I notice the admission price, $25. Outside, the flies are feeding. I run bobbing and weaving past a movie theater advertising a Mel Gibson flick for $12. I'm Jewish. We don't pay retail for Mel Gibson movies. Back at the hotel, I confront the desk clerk as if she was somehow to blame. Hey, what's with the flies? I thought Australia was a civilized, developed country. She says nothing and hands me a pamphlet entitled, The Australian Bushfly. From October through January, bushflies are common in Melbourne. Bushflies feed on tears, sweat, saliva, and mucus. Bushflies do not bite or sting. They lay their eggs in animal dung, not on humans. What a relief. Suggestion, wear a hat with a mesh net that covers the face. A sign behind the desk clerk advertises mesh net hats with the Woolaroo logo for $35. I don't pay retail with hats with logos on them. But you don't have to take my word for it. Still, there was one thing I feared more than being buried alive by Australian bushflies, and I'll get to that a little later. Another, we're going to call this an inaccuracy, had to do with accommodations. So in most places, the guidebooks recommend staying in inexpensive youth hostels. But in Southeast Asia, there's another option they recommend, bless you, called a guest house. Now, when I heard the term guest house, I was picturing like, a bed and breakfast in Vermont, exposed wood and plush mattresses, maybe a few Persian rugs. And I get to Phnom Penh, and I'm checking in into a guest house recommended by the Lonely Planet, and it was called the King Guest House. I get to the King Guest House, and I'm looking around the lobby, and I don't like what I see. There's no exposed wood, there's lots of plastic, and it doesn't look particularly clean. Actually, let me read you the review from the Lonely Planet for the King Guest House in Phnom Penh. In Phnom Penh, Elvis lives on, in name at least. The range of rooms is as wide as the king's girth in the later years of his life. And there's a huge travel center and restaurant downstairs, recommended by the Lonely Planet. Let me tell you about my experience at the King Guest House in Phnom Penh. It's after midnight, and the King lobby is obscured by a locked metal gate. Inside, I can just see a night watchman snoozing in a hammock, draped with a ribbed mosquito net. I tap on the gate. The man jumps up, lets me in. I tip him $1. He goes back to his hammock. As I start towards the darkened staircase, something lumbers around the couch, bolts past the hammock, and settles under a melamine end table. The creature is too large to be a squirrel and too small to be a Rottweiler. I crouch for a better look. It is a rat, a half-bald rat. I follow the expert's advice for encounters with Cambodian wildlife and check for threatening gestures, teeth gnashing, hair bristling, or backwards earth-flinging with hind feet. The rat remains still, watching me. I check for foaming mouth, cowering pups nearby, or teardrop tattoos under the eyes. All clear, but the bald spot kind of bothers me. I tiptoe to the staircase, giving the rat a wide berth. Sit, stay, I whisper. The night man doesn't stir. But you don't have to take my word for it. Anyone heard of this book, Do Travel Writers Go to Hell? So this is a true account from a Lonely Planet writer. So apparently the way this used to work, Lonely Planet would give the writers a budget, some money, and send them off to whatever the country is where they're supposed to recommend places to stay, things to do, places to eat. So this writer gets his money and he goes down to Brazil. He's supposed to cover most of the country, and the first week, as you can see on the cover, he's having a pretty good time. By the end of the week, he has spent almost all of his money and hasn't seen any of the country. So what does he do? He starts making things up. By this point in the trip, I'm lonely, I'm depressed, I haven't contracted a single sexually transmitted disease. I figure I'm gonna die alone, and the sooner, the better. So the first thing I start doing is ignoring all the advice from the Center for Disease Control and the guidebooks, and I start eating off the street carts in Bangkok. $1 for dinner, I'm in. So this is a typical street cart. Bangkok, just kind of sitting out in the air. So I eat off the street carts in Bangkok, up and down the coast of Vietnam, all through Cambodia, never got sick. So I figured if I'm sampling the local cuisine, I might as well sample the local vintages. So this is Vietnamese snake wine. So you've heard of the mezcal from Mexico. It's got the little worm in the bottle. Vietnam, they're not screwing around. Some of these bottles are this big, and they've got an entire cobra pickling in rice wine. And this particular vintage is noted for its scorpion that's also in the cobra's mouth. And it's all pickling in rice wine. So the Vietnamese snake wine is supposed to have some mystical properties. It's supposed to be particularly good for the male virility. So I sampled the wine, had kind of a rubbery aftertaste, didn't do anything for my virility. I don't think I would drink it again. Remember I said I figured I was going to die alone and the sooner the better? So the next thing I started doing were activities called adventure sports. So some of the countries I was visiting, they don't have the same liability laws that we have in the US. So activities that would be too dangerous or require pages and pages of release forms, you don't have to worry about that in some of these countries. If there's even a release form, it's basically one sentence. If you get killed, tough shit. And ground zero for adventure sports is Queenstown, New Zealand. So I get to Queenstown, I'm thumbing through the travel literature, and I found something called the Zorb. So this is a large inflatable ball, there's people in there. I didn't try this, but apparently it can be a little dangerous because you can't really steer, and people have gone off cliffs and died. But one activity I did try was something called riverboarding. So you've heard of whitewater rafting? This is whitewater rafting without the raft. So you're on these giant kickboards, they're actually boogie boards, and here you can see the instructor waving everybody into the rapids. Yeah, come on, this is great. So I did this once. I would not do it again. The one activity I did several times was something called bungee jumping. So the way the bungee jumping works is they bind up your feet with this cord so you can barely walk, so they kind of shove you out to the end of the platform. And the platform, it's about the size of a notebook computer. And you get to the end of the platform and it dawns on you to ask this guy, "Excuse me, sir, how long have you been in this line of business?" And he couldn't care less. He's gone back to his cell phone, so all you can do is yell, "Mommy," and then you jump. And your body can get going up to 80 miles an hour. And at the bottom, the cord catches you, and you bounce up and down, and you bounce up and down. And then when you're done bouncing, there's a giant winch that brings you back up to the platform. So I did this 3 times. I did it twice in New Zealand. This particular jump was 134 meters. But I also did it in South Africa. And this jump was much higher. This was 200 meters. So this was off something called the Blaukrans Bridge. And as you can see, it's an actual bridge. There's cars and buses going across the top of it. And then down below, there's a little platform that people jump off of. And the way they measure these jumps is from the platform all the way down to the ground. But the bungee cord doesn't go all the way down to the ground because that would hurt a lot. So 200 meters, that's the equivalent. You go to the Calgary Tower, have a nice meal, climb up the antenna, and then jump off. So I did this 3 times, never got hurt, never saw anyone get hurt, but apparently it can be a little dangerous.
New Year's Eve, a 22-year-old Australian, Erin Langworthy's bungee jump over the Zambezi River has a certain style as she sets off. Then disaster as her jumping cord snaps and she plunges into the crocodile-infested water.
It went black straight away and I felt like I'd been slapped all over.
She came to in the swirling rapids, but with her feet tied together, still not out of danger.
I actually had to swim down and yank the bungee cord out of what it was caught into.
Erin eventually managed to reach the bank of the river, where rescuers pulled her out battered and bruised, but even then her ordeal wasn't over.
When I was first pulled out of the water, they put me on my back, and so all the water that I'd inhaled meant that I couldn't breathe, so I made them roll me onto my side, and that's when I started coughing out water and blood.
The safari company that organized the jump calls it 111 meters of pure adrenaline on its website, but another look at Erin's jump shows just how lucky she was.
Yes, I think it's definitely a miracle that I survived.
Nazanin Sadri, Al Jazeera.
Still, there was one thing I feared more than dying in a bungee jumping accident, being buried alive by Australian bush flies, eaten alive by a great white shark, or a youth hostel filled with youths, and here it is. And that is a squat toilet. Anyone use one of these?
Yeah.
For those of you that haven't, let me describe the experience. Inside the tiled room, I reach for a light switch and can't find one. I reach for a door and can't find one. A hole in the floor is surrounded by raised porcelain footrests. A saucepan floats in a large barrel filled with water. Something with legs and a tail skitters up the wall and onto the ceiling. A faucet protruding from the wall drip drips into the barrel. A boiling sensation intensifies deep inside me. I drop my pants, hover over the hole, and with one hand grab the barrel for stability. With the other hand, I pump myself back like a little hose. Money starts to fall out of my pockets. As I reach for the cash, my apparatus springs free, spraying my feet, legs, and sandals. All I can do is let it all go. I think you get the idea, but if you want to learn more, you got to read my book. So after 4 months of this, I was so glad to get home I could have kissed the ground. But when I I got back, people had two questions for me. Was the trip really that bad? Yes! But didn't you learn anything? Wasn't there some redeeming value from all of this? Yes. When I got back from this trip, I was less afraid of life and less afraid of taking manageable risks, which was actually good preparation for my next odyssey, book publishing. On the trip, I spent a lot of time alone. I'm a writer. When I'm alone, I write. So during the trip, I kept a blog. It's called The Loneliest Planet. It's still out there, theloneliestplanet.com. And by the time I got back, I had 140 pages of kvetching and moaning and moaning and kvetching. And around this time, this kvetchy travel memoir was doing pretty well. By 2007, she sold 5 million copies. So I read her book. And I read another travel memoir, this one written by a whiny guy like me. He goes to an island in the South Pacific, has a rotten and miserable time. Very funny book. It's called The Sex Lives of Cannibals. So I read both of these books, and I thought to myself, you know, I worked for a computer magazine for 15 years. I can write a travel memoir. So I took writing classes, joined writing groups, and attended overpriced writing conferences. And after a year and a half, I had a travel memoir, and I showed it to a literary agent, and the agent said, you know, actually there's no market for travel memoirs anymore. Hot thing now, memoirs. Anyone heard of this book, Running with Scissors? Takes place in Western Massachusetts, so I'm from Massachusetts. Got turned into a movie, so I read this book, I saw the movie, and I also read this book. Anyone heard of this one?
Yes.
Okay, so this has, for those of you that haven't, this has kind of an interesting story. So this book originally was a novel, and the author couldn't find a publisher. So I'm imagining he thought to himself, okay, let's see, memoirs are the hot thing. Silly me, it's all true. And then he got a huge book deal, and he was on Oprah's show. And when he was on Oprah's show, he mentioned, yeah, you know, actually some of this isn't true. I thought to myself, wait a minute, he wrote a memoir that's not true. I can write a memoir that's not true. So more writing classes, more writing groups, more overpriced writing conferences. And after another year and a half, I had a memoir, and I showed it to another literary agent. The agent said, you know, there's no market for memoirs anymore unless you're a Kennedy. So I was like, wait, I am a Kennedy. And this didn't fool anybody. But the one thing that the literary agent said to me was my best bet as a debut author was to turn this thing into a novel. So, more writing classes, more writing groups, more overpriced writing conferences. After another year and a half, I had a novel. And I showed it to another literary agent, and she said, you know, have you ever thought about writing a travel memoir? So I was like, Then I thought to myself, you know, I just took this 4-month solo trip around the world. I survived this, I survived that, and I survived this. So I doubled down. More writing classes, more writing groups, more overpriced writing conferences. Also around this time, I started memorizing bits and pieces of the novel and performing them at poetry open mics, comedy open mics, story slams. I didn't care. If there was a microphone, I would get up there. So one night I was at a party, and I started talking to a theater director, and the director had seen some of my stuff, and he said, you know, you've probably got enough material there for a 1-hour, one-man show. And there's a circuit of amateur theater festivals all around the US and Canada called Fringe festivals. So I hired this guy, and after another year and a half, we had a 1-hour, one-man show called The Chronic Singles Handbook. So I performed this at 30 different Fringe festivals around the US, Canada. I did the big one in Edinburgh, Scotland. Actually, I did it here in 2016. So none of you guys came to my show. Okay. Anyway, so around this time, I got some decent reviews. I'm feeling pretty confident about my material. So finally, 2015, done with the novel. It's 80,000 words, that's 325 Microsoft Word pages, standard length for a novel. The way the process works, if you want to get the big bucks like Elizabeth Gilbert, you need to get a big publisher. In order to get a big publisher, you need to get a literary agent. So I sent my book out to 30 literary agents, and none of them wanted it. I sent it out to 40 more literary agents, and none of them wanted it. I sent it out to 40 more literary agents. I sent it out to a total of 110 literary agents. and none of them wanted it. So the way the process works, if you can't get a literary agent, you become your own literary agent, and you send the book out yourself to smaller publishers. So smaller advances, smaller print runs, but you get a book. So I sent my book out to 15 small presses, and these guys were interested. The Permanent Press out of Long Island, New York. February 2016, Wednesday night, I get a call from the publisher, loves my book, wants to offer me a $1,000 advance, and he's going to send me a contract. A contract? I'm a writer. I don't know anything about contracts. So I get onto the internet, and I find a website called Predators and Editors. And there's a story about small presses scamming their authors. I found another website called Writer Beware. And there's an article about small presses not paying their royalties. So now I'm getting all worked up. Nobody wants my book. These guys want my book. I don't want to get ripped off. And I'm back and forth, and finally I hired a lawyer. So the lawyer I paid the lawyer $350. So my advance was $1,000. A third of it goes to the lawyer to read a 4-page contract. The lawyer reads the contract, says basically it's okay. Here are a couple things you might want to negotiate. Negotiate? I don't know how to negotiate. I'm a writer. So I get back onto the internet, and I'm finding all this stuff about negotiating, and I put together spreadsheets and Gantt charts and PERT charts, if this, then that. I've got all this stuff written down, and the night before the big negotiation, there's one person I want to talk to, my father. He'd been a small businessman his whole life. He knew how to negotiate. So I call him up, I say, Dad, what do you think? My father says, so how many other offers do you have? Dad, I don't have any. Shut up and sign the contract. So I signed the contract. The next step in the process is the cover. So typically the publisher's supposed to send you a couple covers and you're supposed to approve one of them. They only sent me one. And I'm looking at this cover and I'm not happy. In fact, I am offended. You see, the Permanent Press specializes in literary fiction. That means my book must be literary fiction. There are no beer bottles in literary fiction. That should be a champagne flute or a brandy snifter or a martini glass. Anything but a beer bottle. But the other thing they sent me was this author photo. Oh, that's kind of cool. They got Angkor Wat and the lenses. So I sent this, and I sent that to a couple of friends who also knew nothing about book publishing. My friend said, why don't you tell the publisher to use your author photo for the cover? I thought, wow, what a great idea. But first, I better talk to my father. So I call home, father's not there, mother picks up the phone. I send her this, I send her that. I go, Ma, what do you think? My mother says, so, Mr. Big Shot Author, how long have you been in book publishing? Ma, it's been like 6 months. How long have they been in book publishing? 35 years. Shut up, the cover's fine. So the cover was fine. The final step in the process, reviews. So around the time the publisher sent me the contract for the book, they also sent me this author letter that I didn't read until months later. And the author letter goes something like this. Dear author, we wanted you to know what the book publishing world is really like. Generally speaking, books by non-celebrities sell between 700 and 1,500 copies. To even ensure that many sales, it is imperative that the pre-publication reviews be good ones. So the subtext is no reviews, no book. So the way the process works, my book was supposed to come out in March 2017. November 2016, the publisher sends the book out to all of these reviewers. Reviews as of December 21st, 2016. Nada. Reviews as of December 28th, 2016. Zilch. January 10th, 2017, I get a call from the publisher. He has some bad news. No reviews, no book. I am beside myself. He can't do this to me. Do you know how long I spent on this fucking book? Is it not fair? The publisher said calmly, I'm sorry. No reviews, no book. You can keep the advance. There'll be an ebook, but there will be no physical book. 2 weeks later, I get a call from the publisher. My book has been reviewed by Kirkus. This is a start. And then it gets reviewed by Booklist. And And this changes everything. So after all of my fears of guinea worms and cholera and plague and Japanese encephalitis and typhoid, typhus, trench fever, yellow fever, dengue fever, and diphtheria, and dysentery, and great white sharks and Australian bush flies, and bungee jumping accidents, and then all the literary agents and the rejections, and the small presses and the contracts, and the lawyers, and the book covers, and the reviews, and the non-reviews. I finally got my book.